Welcome back to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. Let me ask you, do you ever feel those pre-interview jitters? I know I do. That nervous energy before stepping into the podcast spotlight. If so, you're not alone. And today we have the perfect guest to help you. You see, Melissa Entzminger is an award-winning presenter and a pro at turning nerves into confidence. She's here to share strategies to not only calm our jitters, but to absolutely crush the podcast interviews. From practical pre-show routines to reframing your mindset for success, Melissa is going to help you set up and shine. Whether you're an experienced guest looking to sharpen your skills or just starting out, this episode will leave you feeling empowered and ready to deliver your best. Let's dive in. We all have nerves going into podcast interviews, especially our first few ones. And that's good. That means that you're taking it seriously. But don't let your nerves inhibit the interview. Today, we've got Melissa with us. She's going to be talking about how to overcome the nerves, how to calm those nerves and crush the interview. Melissa, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just a joy to be here.
I know who you are, right? But there's a lot of people that may not. So can you talk to us a little bit about, who you are, the expertise you bring, and what people can expect to get from listening to you?
I am an award-winning presenter, and I am similar to your clients. I didn't start out that way. I started out very much not liking public speaking, but over the years, I have learned lots of strategies on how to become a better public speaker, and I now work with professionals who want to be better at presenting, whose next life goal requires that they be good at being on camera and looking confident. And so that's where I come in.
Oh, that's awesome. And like so many of our clients, the best, I think, podcast guests often tend to be more introverts. Right? They're not used to public speaking. They're not comfortable with it, but this platform works so well because it's just a conversation and they prepare for it. They have thought through the answers. They give thoughtful answers, but they have jitters beforehand. That idea of it's a Zoom call, but there's all these people that are going to be listening. And so let's dive in a little bit about what you can do to sort of calm those jitters before you jump on the call.
Well, there's a lot of things that you can do to help calm those jitters. The first thing that you might want to consider is thinking about what topics you want to talk about on your podcast and practicing what stories you want to tell and thinking through the points that you want to make. And the purpose of doing that is anytime you go into a new situation, everybody feels a little bit nervous about it. But if you've practiced in advance, then it helps you feel more comfortable doing it. I worked with a client recently, and they were a newer entrepreneur, and their name was Lisa, and they were nervous about going on a podcast, although they realized that podcasting was a great way for them to gain visibility for their brand. And as we talked, there were so many nerves that came into place about being on this podcast. And through working together, one of the first things I did was ask a series of questions to uncover where the root of those nerves were coming from. Sure, there's tons of strategies you can use, but if you don't get to the root of it, then it's hard to actually implement those strategies. And together, we uncovered that she was comparing herself to more seasoned entrepreneurs, and that imposter syndrome and worrying, am I going to be enough? Is my information going to be enough? And I encouraged her to think about it to flip the switch, to turn that on its head. Instead of thinking, am I enough? Do people think I'm an expert? Reminding her that she is a subject matter expert and that she's coming on these podcasts to provide value. And so by thinking about it from how can I give value to my listeners, totally changes that perspective and help decreases those nerves.
And it's when you think the spotlight's on you, it's nervous. But I love how you say, put the spotlight on the other person. And I know your background, you originally were studying to be a lawyer, correctly? Is that correct?
I was, yes.
Yeah. And what helped me with this is a friend of mine that was a lawyer or is a lawyer. And he pointed out the legal definition of an expert, right? Someone that knows more by their training, by their experience, than the average person. So, right. Some people are experts because they've got their PhD. Other people are experts because they've lived through it. If you're talking about your business, your industry, man, you know so much about that. So I always, that helped me remind me that there's only one thing that I am the world's undisputed expert in, and that's my opinion, right? But I've got expertise in different areas, and no one's ever gone on a podcast and asked me about, the influence of inflation on the macroeconomic terms, right? That's not my expertise. I don't even have an opinion on that one. So I love how you frame it on the audience, not just on yourself. Is there anything else you can think of that will help people calm those jitters?
Yes. So a lot of podcasters, well, presenters in general, are worried about making a mistake. What if I fail? What if the audience thinks that I don't do a good job? And I love to remind my clients that at the end of the day, nobody knows what you're about to say. So even if you say something you weren't planning on saying, nobody knows you made a mistake unless you make it obvious that you make a mistake by saying something like, oh no, I didn't mean to say that. But as long as you roll with it, nobody knows that that's what you were going to say. And likewise, with those jitters, we aren't connected to your nerve endings. And so as long as you look confident, the thing about looking confident and pretending to be confident and actually being confident is they look exactly the same to your audience. In fact, they even smell the same. And so if you look like you're the most confident person in the world and you remind yourself, just as you were talking about earlier, that you are a subject matter expert and you're adding value to your audience, that helps those nerves disappear.
Let's dig into that. So looking confident, acting confident, even faking confidence. What does that look like? How would you do that?
Well, I think it comes into play with how you answer questions and how some of your nonverbals that you communicate through the show as well. And so if it's a video call, that would be important to make sure that you're sitting up in your chair and you're using hand gestures to emphasize your words appropriately. And sometimes people get really excited and over enthusiastic and they kind of rock back and forth in their chair when they're making points, and nobody wants to get seasick. So if you can sit still, then that is a great way to help you look confident with your body language as well. And then of course, if it's just a traditional podcast, practicing those pausing is really important. So the guest or the host asks you a question, and instead of just going with an to fill the void, if you pause to collect your thoughts, that helps you look more confident as well.
You must have been listening to all of my old interviews or watching them in preparation of what not to do, because my team could talk about my early interviews and I would always go from one side to the other. And so if you're listening, right, you'll understand this. So when you go toward the microphone and then you go away from the microphone, and if somebody's watching you on video, it makes sense. But if all of a sudden somebody asks you about a book and I look at my brief or my bookcase and the volume drops, it's like, yeah, it doesn't seem right there. Or the other thing is, like you said, just sitting up, slowing down. Most podcasts are listened to sped up. So if you get nervous, talk faster and faster, people just aren't going to hear that. Do you ever talk about or think about routines that you could do to put you in the right mindset for the podcast?
There are a lot of great routines that you can do to help get you ready for a podcast. One that I like to talk about with my clients is visualization. And so it is incredibly powerful. Famous athletes use it, like Michael Phelps, Michael Jordan. And why it's so powerful is it tricks your brain into thinking you've already done it. Now, everybody knows you get nervous about doing something the first time, maybe the second time. But if you feel like you've done it multiple times, then those nerves start to not be a factor. So how does it work? Well, you sit in a comfortable chair and you picture yourself going through the podcast interview. Picture in as much detail as you can what answers you're going to be giving, talking animatedly to your audience, and communicating value to them. Picture all the way to the end where the host thanks you for being on the podcast. And you can do that for multiple days leading up to your podcast interview. You can do it right before your podcast interview. And your brain will start to think that you've actually done it before. And so when you go to do it, it'll feel so much more natural and your nerves will be calm as well. I also encourage clients to practice doing a power stance. So this is something that social psychologist Amy Cuddy talks about on her TED Talk. But essentially, you stand up straight and tall and you put your hands behind your back, kind of in a super person, Superman, Superwoman pose, and you hold it for a few minutes. And that decreases your cortisol and increases your testosterone and helps you feel more calm as you go into preparing for your podcast interview.
All of those I love. And I think of other clients we've had, Arthur Joseph, who's the speech coach for the NFL. He talked about having a wire from the top of your head to your tailbone and just pulling that up and sitting up straight as opposed to hunching over, right? It does a world for your confidence. I can even think of one of our great friends, great podcast host, great friend of Interview Valet, Christopher Lockhead. He has shared that before every podcast interview and every podcast he does, he plays music. I think it's David Bowie's song, "We Could Be Heroes," right? And he wants to set that tone for him, that what he's trying to do. He's trying to help somebody's life, to bring them a new idea. And once again, like you talk about, it's not about what do I look like? What will I sound like? But what am I trying to do? So much to the point now, if I ever hear that song, I think of Christopher getting ready to do a podcast.
That's amazing. Yeah, those pre podcast rituals are so important to get your body and your mind ready to give that podcast interview. Just like you would stretch before you'd work out or you'd run a race, it gets your body ready to do that. And similarly, those are excellent ways to get yourself ready and help calm those nerves. There's one more technique that I really encourage clients to use, and it's a breathing technique called the 5 by 5 by 5. And how it works is it calms your parasympathetic nervous system, helping you feel calmer. And so you breathe in for the count of 5, you hold it for the count of 5, and you exhale for the count of 5. And you do that 5 times. And I'll never forget, I was teaching a workshop and I was explaining how to do this and then asking the participants to come up and share. And at the end of it, one of the participants shared with me, "I tried your breathing technique and it totally worked." So
I have heard of that before. I've never thought about doing that just before a podcast interview. So what, just before you join the room? How long would that take just to do that? 4 or 5 times? Is that what you focus on?
Yeah, 5 times. Yeah. So it probably took about 30 seconds or so. So yeah, I do it shortly before you join the podcast interview room, like you're saying, but it also shifts your thinking from "I'm nervous about doing this, I don't know how this is going to go," to your breathing. And so by shifting that focus and calming your parasympathetic nerves, it's kind of a 1-2 punch on helping you feel calmer.
Now, there's another thing that I'm adding to my pre-routine. And one of the things where I see people get in trouble with is that if the interview starts, at 10 o'clock and they just start thinking about it at 9:58 and are trying to find the link and all the rest of that, they come to the interview already in the wrong mindset. They're already stressed. So, if the interview starts at 10, I always say block it out at least 15 or 20 minutes beforehand. So you can get the right mindset. You can get the water, the coffee, all the rest of that. You can prepare for the show and now do the 5 by 5 by 5 breathing in there too.
Yes, 100%. Well, you have an excellent book and a wonderful checklist that helps people get ready for those podcast interviews. And 100%, if you start earlier than you think you should, that 15-20 minute mark, then you'll show up cool, calm, and collected and not a frazzled hot mess, which nobody wants to be.
So I've got to ask from a personal thing. I said coffee, drinking coffee, and I was looking for your facial expression. It's like, did she cringe with that? Because I've heard some speech coaches say, oh, drink warm water while you're doing it. Drink different things like that. You should probably have something to drink while you're there on the interview, right? In case you get a tickle in your throat or something. But how would you recommend that?
I would encourage you to have some water handy, just like you're saying, in case you get a tickle. And I think you want to listen to your own body. If you're already feeling nervous and excited about the interview, you might want to skip your coffee that morning. But if maybe you didn't sleep that well the night before, then maybe a little bit of coffee might not be a bad thing. I think hard and fast rules don't take into account individual personal experiences, but definitely having water nearby in case you need it in the middle of the interview is a good idea.
I was going to say, I always need caffeine in my life. So, all right. So we talked about, having those pre-interview jitters, doing some things to calm those, some things that you can do during the interview. Do you find that if it starts well, the jitters go away as you get into it?
I do. It's kind of like a snowball rolling down a mountain. If it starts well, then it continues to progress in a positive fashion. So with that being said, you want to think about the opening stories that you want to say and the opening points that you want to communicate a little bit more than even the rest of the podcast, because then once you've started and it's going well, then your brain's going to say, okay, I can do this. And instead of, sometimes our brain says, well, you already made a mistake, why not just the whole rest of the interview is going to be terrible. And so starting positive is always a great way to end positive.
I've often said there's only 2 questions on a podcast interview. They're always the same questions, and they always come at the same time, right? That first question of who are you? Why are you here? Why should I listen to you? Right? No matter what question they ask you, that's really what the audience is listening for. So to think through that, and then, that's how to take off the plane, and then how to land the plane. That last question is always going to be, so any final words, or, how can people get in touch with you? And so if you practice how to start the interview and how to end the interview confidently, the rest in the middle is just a discussion.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah, it gives you that bookend confidence that you need to help make sure that the podcast interview is successful. And at the end of the day, dealing with those nerves and having more confidence, those are all skills that can be developed by adding these strategies in and thinking through these things in advance, so that when you go to give your podcast, it reflects positively on you and the brand that you're trying to convey.
I love that you say there's skills to be developed, right? Because often people are like, well, they're just a natural communicator. And it's almost like, well, they're a natural golfer, or they're a natural football player. No, they weren't, right? They weren't that good when they were 7 years old. And I think often that pre-interview routine, it's like every time a golfer steps up to the ball, they've got the same routine. Every time a baseball player steps in the batting box, they've got the same routine. And then the other one that I know a lot of people struggle with is, I call it watching the game film. So after you've done an interview, so many people are like, I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't want to listen to it. But yet, if you want to get better, if you want to increase that skill, talk to us about learning from your interviews and what you can do on that.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because learning from your interviews is so important. A lot of clients that I work with don't like the sound of their own voice, but I encourage them to fall in love with the sound of their voice. Even though what you hear on video isn't what we hear in our heads, that's how the rest of the world hears you. And so if you can fall in love with how you sound, then playing with things like vocal variations and speaking quicker or slower and varying your pitch, those are all tools in the speaker's toolbox, and you'll get to see that from watching the film. And so often clients I work with think that they were really impactful in one part and it didn't land quite the way that they thought it would, but they would have never have known that had they not watched back the game footage as you explained it. And so whether you are preparing for an interview or you've given an interview, it's always a good idea to record yourself practicing, and then you can see what we see. And oftentimes we think that we're being more animated, especially on Zoom calls and video recordings, and it actually has the opposite effect. It mutes what you look like. And so you've got to amp that up a little bit more than you normally would. Not like the Energizer Bunny, but just, turn the dial a little bit more to be a little bit more animated. And you can see all of that through watching the video. So that's an excellent way to help improve your skills and to see where you need to make modifications and tweaks.
That's interesting. And it's the idea of we have a vision of what it looks like or what it was like in our mind, but is that the way it was in reality? Right. When I took that jump shot, I was above the rim, and then you actually watch the film and it's like, no, your feet were 2 inches off the ground, or the way I thought something landed could be totally different. And, a story that I share was that early on, a friend of mine said, "Why did you call the company Interview Ballet?" And I was like, "No, it's Interview Ballet with a B, right? Interview Ballet. That's stupid. Why would you think that?" And he's like, "Yeah, I thought that was a stupid name too, but you say it so dang fast. That's what I heard." And it's so normal to me. And I think, like with podcast interviews, 70% of the people listen to it sped up. So if somebody in normal conversation can't understand what I'm saying, the idea that when it's sped up and they're only listening on audio, that they're going to get it, that's missing the mark there.
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the tools that you can use to help calm your nerves is speaking slower than you think you should when you're getting interviewed. Sometimes our perception when the nerves take over and the adrenaline kicks in is we speak faster than we realize. And so when I work with clients, I encourage them to speak slower than they think they should. It'll feel really weird, but then when they actually go back to watch the video or listen to the podcast, they'll be speaking at the exact right pace.
That's interesting. We've always given feedback on first interviews for our clients, right? I would listen to them and give them the feedback of, you're talking faster than the host. You need to slow down. I can't think of anyone I have ever told that I told them you need to speak faster, right? It's always you need to speak slower and you need to bring the energy level up. And it was interesting when you just say to someone, you should slow down. Okay, that's an opinion. But when we were able to start to put data to it and say that you talked 22% faster than the host, then it's not an opinion anymore. It's like, oh yeah, I guess I need to slow down.
Yeah, I bet that was very impactful and helpful to your clients because then they could see it wasn't just, okay, this is actually reality. This isn't just their opinion and they're wrong.
Well, it's one thing to do a keynote, right? Because there's no variables in it. You get up there, you talk, and you finish it. But with an interview, Mike Tyson? Everybody has a plan until they get hit. And what happens if you get asked a question that throws you, that you don't have an answer for, that knocks you off your stride on a podcast interview? What advice do you have there to keep your confidence and to keep that going?
So the first thing I would encourage you to do if you get asked a question when you're like, oh no, I wasn't prepared for this, is to pause. Give your brain time to catch up to what you're saying and to think through what you might say in response to that. If it completely caught you off guard and you really weren't sure what you were going to say at all to it, then I would encourage you to go back and think about what's the goal of being on this podcast. What do I want my listeners to walk away with at the end of this podcast? And work on putting an answer together that helps you achieve that goal. So if, for example, you asked me a question I wasn't prepared for, and like on this one, we're talking about nerves, I would go back to some strategies about nerves, or maybe tell a story about a client who was able to overcome those nerves. So just think through the main point that you're trying to get across and weave that into your answer so that you don't end up with oh no, what do I say? I don't want to look stupid.
It's interesting. And podcast interviews are not gotcha media, right? It's not 60 minutes where they're trying to make you look bad. The better you look as a guest, the better the host looks. But I can think of a story where we had an author that had, he'd a West Point graduate. He'd gone through Wharton, and he wrote a book for families and applying everything that he knew from his MBA and time on Wall Street, how you could apply it to running a family business. That's what he always looked at. Running a family is like running a business. And somebody asked him, so do you have any hot stock tips? Right? How do you answer that? And I love how he paused on that. And he's like, that's a great question. Right? I get that asked often. So what he was doing was more or less, he said, buying time. And then he's like, well, I didn't want to answer it because he was honest with them. He's like, I could tell you something now, and it's probably already dated. By the time somebody listens to this, it's very, very dated, and it won't help them. So what will really help them is thinking about their family as a business and turned it back into the overarching thing as opposed to getting flustered by it. And I think often politicians, love them or hate them, they can do this very, very well. I'm glad you asked that question. They'll acknowledge the question and then talk about the bigger thing that they're there to talk about.
Yeah. And that is a skill. That is something that can be practiced and learned. And you're exactly right. There's two parts to it. The first part is you buy yourself some time by thinking through, like, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. And meanwhile, your brain is busily thinking about how you answer it. But then second, tie it back to the goal that you want the audience to come away with.
So as we wrap up here, whoever listened to this probably saw the title, right? How to calm the jitters, how to calm the nerves and crush the interview. What would you say to them, to talk to them, right? They've got the nerves, they've gotten some tips here, but what final words would you give to them to really help them get over it so they can share their brilliance with the world?
I would encourage them to think through, what is your why? Why are you in business? Why are you sharing your message? Why are you trying to help people and to make an impact? And at the end of the day, you have a unique skill set that other people don't have. And knowing that somebody who's less qualified and less talented than you is out there doing things that you could be doing is a great, like, oh my goodness, I need to share my message. And so I would encourage you to think through, what is your why, and know that when you are giving your podcast interviews, at the end of the day, if you can help one person or make a difference in one person's life, then you've succeeded. And so thinking through what those expectations are and making them more of a reality is something that will help calm your nerves and ultimately help you crush that interview.
I love how you reframe it, and you've done it consistently through this, right? If it's all about you, then it's all the nerves, right? If it's all about the audience, then you're there to serve. And I can think of something, I think it was Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller. I remember he told a story one time, and he mentioned, how bad do you have to hate someone not to tell them something that's going to help them or save their life? right? So I know that it could be a little bit awkward, but hey, get it out there, help someone with that. So Melissa, if people heard you and they're like, this is great, but I need more help on this, right? It's one of the things that's been holding them back, right? Holding their business back, holding them personally back, getting over these jitters, getting the confidence to speak on podcasts, on stages, even in groups. What's the next steps? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, I have written a free ebook that I am excited to share with your audience. And that ebook has all kinds of actionable strategies for them to help kick those nerves to the curb. And they can find that at taking, TAKING, your stage dot myflowdesk, FLOWDESK.com/PIM. I'm sure we'll put it in the show notes as well.
That's awesome. So we'll put that back in the show notes there, but I would highly suggest, right? If you struggle with nerves and you think it's holding you back on being a great guest, right? Get out there, practice. And if you need some expert coaching with it, definitely check out Melissa. She's been a great resource. Melissa, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What an amazing conversation with Melissa. If there's one takeaway from today, it's this: nerves are normal, but they don't have to hold you back. Melissa shared many actionable strategies, from visualizing success and using techniques like the 5x5x5 breathing method to reframe your mindset around service and not just perfection. Remember, it's not about you. It's about the value you're bringing to the audience. Preparation and mindset are your best tools to turn those jitters into energy that fuels your performance. If you're ready to kick those nerves to the curb and elevate your game, grab Melissa's free book packed with tools to help you shine. You can get the link in the show notes. Your voice matters. The world needs to hear you now more than ever. Don't let nerves keep you on the sidelines. Take that next step, and we'll see you back next time on the Podcast Interview Marketing Show.